I think it works. Good morning, everybody. I'm very happy to be among you in this symposium. And I'm thanking the organizers to give me this opportunity to participate at l'ISISI in France. My presentation is titled Characteristics of Earthquakes in Mediterranean Sea and their effects in Arab Islamic heritage. Seismology relies heavily on trying to predict, so also to mitigating. So it needs a series of information and historical data that may help to calculate appropriate indicators of areas of weakness in the Earth crust. Historical sources, yearbooks, books, and letters on the subject can be considered as important sources in the monitoring earthquakes events. It should be noted that
Maintenant, oui. Oui, ça va, merci. Merci.
it should be noted that seismic events have received special attention in Arabic writings. In Arab Islamic civilization, the first scientific writing for the first stage was in Arabic. After some centuries, regions, people from different regions used their local languages in scientific, Turkish, Urdu, and so on and so on. My presentation will focus on some aspects of
Hello, yes, okay.
discourse about earthquakes in Arab Islamic heritage. The first aspects is the descriptions of earthquakes, their types, and the causes of their occurrence. For the description of the earthquakes, I can say that the earthquakes have been described in traditional Arabic Islamic sources in different ways. The most interesting descriptions liken them to an underground vibratory movement that makes the earth undulate, the trembling of a feather rish, the movement of a sail, or even the flapping of a bird's wing. One text of Ibn al-Azim about the earthquakes in 533 year of the Islamic era, you can add 622 to reach the Christian era. He describes these earthquakes and said, on Thursday, 3 Safar, this is a month, a strong earthquake occurred, then another followed, and the earthquakes continued. So the people fled Aleppo to the outskirts of the country, and the earth was seen to ripple, and the stones on it were shaking like weights in a safe. The ideas of Ibn Sina, Avicenna is a famous scholars, Arab Muslim scholars, and is famous in West too. Al-Qazwini and others can really be considered as a leap in the development of the scientific conceptions of the phenomenon of earthquakes and the internal structure of the earth. It is clear from what it has been mentioned in the writings of Islamic civilization scholars, such as Al-Qazwini, Al-Bayruni, Al-Farabi, Jabir ibn Hayyan, Al-Hamadani, Al-Kindi, Ikhwan al-Safa, which was an association of scholars. Maybe the first association of scholars in the world. They have also religious and political interesting. As-Suyuti and others. That the most important causes of earthquakes are earth movements resulting from internal body movements, subsidence, and the impact of meteor and meteorites. These are the three principal causes of earthquakes in Arab Islamic heritage. Basically, we can say that these reasons are the same as those known to seismologists of our time. There is a discourse about types of earthquakes too. Dr. Hamoudi Adnan, which is an Iraqi historian scientist who works lots in Algeria, believes that the first classification of earthquakes could be attributed to Avicenna. It is based on the criterion of genetic factors. Thus, Ibn Sina divided earthquakes into three categories. The first category is the collapse earthquakes. The second is the subsidence earthquakes. And the third is volcanic earthquakes. In addition, Ibn Sina developed a second classification based on the nature of the tremor that causes the earthquake, according to which he distinguished two classes, two groups of earthquakes: a quiver earthquakes in which the effect of the tremor, a quiver earthquakes in which the effects of tremor is essentially vertical and rectilinear. The second is convulsive earthquakes in which the effects of tremor is lateral. And the third is a ladder earthquakes, like a lad or a scale, in which the effect of tremors is both vertical and lateral. The second aspects of earthquakes which we can talk about is earthquakes intensity and their material damage. First, we can relieve some texts talking about physical damage. From the text that I have been able to consult, it is possible to deduce some characteristics related to intensity of earthquakes. Al-Maqrizi says about the events of the year 565 of the Islamic era. On Monday, the 12th of Shawwal, is the month's next Ramadan. I presume you know Ramadan. After the sunrise, a huge earthquake occurred in Damascus, from which some of the balconies of the Umayyad mosque collapsed, and the heads of the eastern and western minarets were cracked, and the northern minaret was shaken as the front shook in the gale-forced wind. The most important features that stand out are a great diversity in the intensity of earthquakes, a variation in earthquakes intensity according to time, and a variation in earthquakes intensity according to location or to space. There is many texts talking about human losses or causalities. This table resumes the human losses of earthquakes in the Western Mediterranean Sea or basin, and with the human losses varies from one people. He's the chief judge who dies in the earthquakes of Cairo of 60 686 of the Islamic era to 20,000 people who death in the earthquakes of Aleppo of 565 of the Islamic era. So it's very varying. This third aspect is about earthquakes intensity, duration, and extension. It is understood from Al-Masoudi talks and others about earthquakes that the Levant and the countries of Eastern Anatolia are characterized by the abundance of earthquakes and their extreme violence. In these writings and books, there is a classification of earthquakes, of the extent of earthquakes. Some earthquakes interested some cities of the Levant. Others interest more cities of the Levant and the regions, more regions of the Levant. Others are more have more spread from south of Egypt to the Alexandria and the coast, Egypt coast and Levant. And the most spreading of earthquakes are to have been resented or be effective from Ceuta in Morocco to Mosul in Iraq. This is consistent with the current reality and with the conclusion of recent seismic studies in this figure. Amos Noor from Stanford University has studies 47 locations of ancient cities demolished or destroyed by earthquakes. And he tried to relate this to the main earthquakes in the region from 90 to 1980, and it coincided very well with with what is mentioned in his study and in the writings in the Arab Islamic heritage. There is a discourse too about aftershocks and seismic durations. The table below summarizes data related to duration and the number of tremors that characterized a group of earthquakes which concern the Mediterranean basin. We can see that there is from many sources, and there is information about the duration and number of tremors and the location and the date. Some earthquakes dure only an instant, some 3 hours, some to read a chapter of the Quran, a chapter, not very short and not very long. And there is some earthquakes which occurs 20 or 100 times from in 19 days. And the last one, the earthquakes occurs twice or 3 times a week from about 1 month. 28 days. The extents and the superficies of earthquakes are also treated in these writings. Among the important information contained in the Arab Islamic heritage related to seismic events, we find data on magnitude and on the extent of the earthquakes. So we can cite the event recorded in some cities of Levant, as I said before. The events which affected most of cities and regions of the Levant, the events which were extended from Upper Egypt to the city of Alexandria and covered all the cities of the Egyptian coast and the rest of the Levant, and perhaps even reached Persia, and those whose extent was much greater, such as the earthquake in 61 Islamic era, extending from Ceuta on the West Mediterranean coast to Mosul and Iraq. Al-Maqrizi says it was a great earthquake that spread most of the land of Egypt and the Levant, Al-Jazeera, the countries of the Romans, Sicily, Cyprus, Mosul, and Iraq, and it reached Ceuta in the countries of the Maghreb. But concerning the era covered by the earthquake, the citations were very rare. There is a discourse also about phenomena and natural impacts of phenomena associated to earthquakes and the natural impacts of these earthquakes. Phenomena and the statute associated with earthquakes. In this point, the sources that dated earthquakes did not neglect to talk about these aspects. And the most important of these phenomena and conditions can be summarized as follows. The occurrence of thunder and lightning before a great earthquake, which was heard and sensed from half a mile from Aleppo. The eclipse of the sun accompanying a great earthquake that occurred in the land of the Romans. Seeing smoke descending from the sky to the earth between sunset and the night's rise, accompanying the earthquakes of Karak and Chobak in Jordani of the year of 608. A sequence of very loud sounds, the annoying loud thunder sounds that followed the earthquake tremors that took place in Hama in Syria, led to a number of these. And finally, hot winds, called in Arabic Samum, which reflect to poison, Samum. It is a poisoned wind. Hot wind blew with a hurricane. They lasted for 3 days after the earthquake, which occurred in Egypt in the year 588. There is some effects on earthquake landforms cited in these writings. We have traced an important number of impacts mentioned in sources that dated the most important seism events in the Islamic countries in general and in Egypt and the Levant in particular. They are as follows. Rising and lowering of areas and formation of hills because of this. Sliding and horizontal transition of land. Cracking of the earth. Falling rocks and lands collapse. Exploding of water springs. And hiding of rivers and streams and the dispersion inside the earth. There is also a great interest to tsunamis or tidal waves. In these manuscripts, Al-Maqrizi says about Egypt's and Levant's earthquakes of the year 561, and in it, the sea in Palestine disappeared from earthquakes, and it moved away from the coast about a day's walk, then returned over many people who came out to gather from its land. It is to point that a rereading and analysis of this data can be useful in understanding the tectonic states of the Mediterranean region and the potential for coastal areas to be affected by seismic waves. In conclusion, referring to Western books and articles which are interested to the history of seismic thoughts, we generally find an absence of the contribution of Islamic civilization in this field by jumping centuries from the history of human scientific giving. Like Ben Menachem, who tried to summarize the most stages of seismic thought history, and also Agnew, I forgot his first name, who wrote an article on the history of seismology, and he said that Arab Islamic thought was only an Aristotelian echo of seismic reflections. It must be noted that the Islamic civilization's imprint is very clear at a theoretical and a historical levels. It is possible to summarize the participation of Muslim scholars in the development of seismic thought in their contribution to description and determination of what earthquakes are, as well as in their contribution to understanding the phenomenon, its interpretation, and its scientific explanation. Historical sources and travel stories and other sources provide many important and varied information and data concerning the exact date of the seismic event, the hour of its occurrence, the number of its vibrations, the extent of its spread, the number of victims caused by it, its damage, its natural effects, its impact on landforms, and the phenomena associated with it. As shown in this figure, historical data are important to evaluate the earthquake intensity. These historical data also are necessary to complete the earthquakes record or archive for mitigation the risk of earthquakes and for good and a complete study of earthquake risk. So this gives to these sources a great value and importance that as the exploration of historical data helps to evaluate the intensity of earthquakes, it is also it allows, beside extrapolation of automatic seismic data provided by monitoring devices, the production of the seismic record of a specific region, which purpose is to study the seismic risk in order to reduce it. Thanks for your attention, and I am very, very happy to be here between you. And I want to thank Enzo for giving this opportunity, and I want to thank also Mr. Barry Cooper, who is not here, which really encouraged me to work in history of geology. Thank you.
They gave me the microphone. Okay. This is this is so important, not only to the history of. Oh. Yeah. This is so important for the history of science, but also, as you say, for the risk, the catalogs of earthquakes and tsunamis. for the Mediterranean region, there are some catalogs, and I hope you can add to these catalogs. I can help you if you're aware of how to add to these catalogs of tsunamis and earthquakes. Thank you.
Okay, so I want to make two remarks and ask you one question. So the first remark is that the first identification of the two kinds of earthquakes was made by Posidonius in the 2nd century BC. So he was the first to report, at least, the difference between the longitudinal and shear wave velocities. So the second point is that I wish just emphasize the importance of the study you mentioned, because in particular at my institute, people are working very seriously on active faults, especially in the Levant. And so they dig trenches and try to correlate the way the faults are moving with historical data recorded by ancient authors. And that's very important to have a better idea of the frequency of these earthquakes and the risk with which they are associated. So that's a very interesting example of the importance of historical studies in geology, like those you mentioned. And my question is, you mentioned Avicenna. It happens that I know pretty well his work, and as the Irwan al-Safa too, but I didn't find any mention of earthquakes in Avicenna. So could you tell me where, in which book it has to be found?
Book Naturals, الطبيعيات.
Is it in this?
In his
Shafa?
encyclopedia Al-Shifa.
Is Al-Shifa?
Al-Shifa encyclopedia, there is a book which
which
is
book?
Naturals.
Yeah.
In this book, there is a long discourse about earthquakes.
Okay, thank you.
I can give you the exact reference and the pages.
Yeah.
Okay, so I would like to congratulate you for a very interesting presentation. I think many of these old Arabic scientists were great scientists, as I know, for instance, Al-Biruni, and it's very good for us to have more information. But my question here would be, among all the results that you mentioned, I could not see that anyone has made any relation between earthquake and volcanic activity, volcanic eruption. Did you find some correlation between these two phenomena in your literature?
From when I enumerated the causes of the earthquakes, that there were volcanic causes. And Avicenna classified earthquakes on 3 classes according to genetic reasons. And one of the class is volcanic earthquakes. So the relation between volcanoes and earthquakes is very present.
But did they find, especially because this, I am more interested because one of my students, Ahmad Bilal, did this study in Damascus. Did it correlate some relation between earthquake and volcanic eruption in Syria?
In Syria, I don't know, because in Yemen, yes, there are volcanoes. Aden is some volcanoes who were active for many times. And in the work of Al-Hamadani, who is a Yemenite, there is relations between earthquakes and volcanoes there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Khalaf, for your presentation. And I found quite impressive the level of details that in your sources presents different aspects of earthquakes, because this kind of details are quite missing in the contemporary or even later Western literature, so all the data concerning the movements, concerning the impacts on the landform and so on. No? Sometimes we have sources which are less informative. And so that's quite interesting to compare these two aspects. I was also curious on the word in Arabic language used for earthquake, because I wonder if it's a bit like Latin words, for example, can be compared to the Latin words terremotus, or if it has a different translation. And last very short aspect regards, you mentioned the association of scholars, which you had seen in your sources. And it's interesting because we always refer to a few figures, in particular Avicenna and others, but we don't have a clear idea of this network. Can you actually say something about how it emerged from your sources? They quote each other, letters, other ways? Thank you.
Thank you, Enzo. About the terms used in Arabic are different. The earthquake is zilzal. It's not. It has not Latin origins, but Arabic origins. So there are words, Arabic words about the earthquakes and about details of the earthquakes. The Arab language is very rich. About 15 million racines. No, in Arabic language, but in earthquakes there are many words. There are many words to talk about earthquakes, but zilzal is the famous, is the more the largest used. For the association Ikhwan al-Safa, it was a secret association. They met each other, but they have political tendencies. They were perhaps a group of Ismaili groups, Shiite minority. So perhaps they will be perhaps not well treated. So they were a secret association or group. But there are many historians who tried to write about them and to know really who they were.
Thank you.
We have a question online.
We have a question on
Yeah.
Oh.
I can read it, but
Yeah,
my
please
English
read.
is. So thank you so much for the very interesting presentation. Was there any Aristotelian influence?
The Aristotelian influence, it is cited by Agnew-Carr, I think, but you know, the first attempts of the first scientific attempts in Arab Islamic words was based on Greek traductions. So the influence of Greek scholars is very important in the first years or the first century and second century. After in their own investigation, they try to give their own explanation to natural phenomena.
Thank you so much. My question is that I had another one, but I talked you in the coffee. They are very precise, telling about the places where the earthquakes happened. And I was wondering if they produced a map or maps about this distribution of earthquakes or graphical representations.
There are few graphic representation and maps, but I focused on transcript books which are not accompanied by these figures and maps. But in the manuscripts, we can find something like this.
Thank you.
And why they were very aware to earthquakes and volcanoes too? Because of religious reasons. They think that earthquakes are punishments. So they were very, very aware about earthquakes to describe them, to date them, and so on and so on.
So my question is about the classification of the sources of earthquakes, and you said that one of the ancient reasons was meteorite impacts, impacts by meteorites or asteroids, and that is probably the earliest reference to such a source for earthquakes. And I would like to know more about where that information comes from.
Yes. In my research, I found 3 documents. One of Ibn Sina, Avicenna, and one of Al-Maqrizi, and the third one I don't remember the name of the scholar who said it. 3 citations about meteorites and the descriptions. Avicenna is the Avicenna descriptions is the most detailed. And in Cape Town in 1916, my Moroccan colleague, Hasna, I know it is famous on studying meteorites. It is a great researcher in meteorite studies. They have now a meeting in Spanish about this. We were present at a presentation which try to give history of meteorite studies. It is noticed that the first studies or citation were in 17th century. I said to Hasna Ashnawi, it's called Hasna Ashnawi, I told her I have some texts earlier. She told me, please send me this text. I sent her this text, but I don't know what did she do with them.